Hey, so welcome everybody. We are super excited to be sharing lots of valuable information with you all on this webinar about histamine. And it's a topic that is very near and dear to both mine and Lucy's own hearts. We have both had our own journeys with the wonderful world of histamine, and it's something that people really don't know enough about. When we think about histamine, we often think of allergy season and hay fever and sneezing, but it is so much more than that. So we really want to give you lots of juicy information this evening to help you really understand how this could be impacting your body, and most importantly, what you can start to do to change this. So I am going to kick us off. I will introduce myself because some of you may not know who I am. So my name is Sarah Law. I am a naturopathic nutritionist and qualified functional health coach, working mainly with women in their 40s and beyond to help them thrive as they go through the funny shifts that happen as we start to age as females. And I work with women through multiple different things: menopause, hormone shifts, gut issues, autoimmune conditions, some of the really deep kind of, stuff that a lot of people can't fix are the women that I work with extensively. And I absolutely love what I do. And my passion really came from my own journey with having an autoimmune condition, immune system dysregulation, some hormonal imbalances, and all the fun stuff. And so I love to share that because I truly believe that, sometimes challenging things happen in life, but they often lead us to our purpose. And I know for a fact that the challenges that I went through 100% led me to finding my true purpose on this planet, which is to help women thrive. So I'm going to kick us off this evening, and then we're going to pass over to the incredible Lucy. And you absolutely want to make sure you've got notepads and pens at the ready, because when this woman speaks, you will be like, trying to scribble as quickly as you can, because what comes out is just insane. She is the most incredible therapist I think I've ever met in my life, and most of my clients end up working with Lucy alongside me, so we can work from, the mind, body, soul perspective, the whole physical, mental, and emotional component, because that is true health. Working on all layers is absolute true health. So let me share my screen and then we will get going. Let me just make sure I can do that. Okay. Okay, can everyone see my screen? Am I doing well with technology? Yes,
You are
amazing.
today, babes. You are.
Yes, I've nailed it. I figured this was out. It's taken a while, but I've got there. So, we are talking about the wonderful world of histamine. So, what is histamine? Histamine is basically it's a cell signaling molecule. So we have different types of molecules within the body, and think of them a bit like text messages. They send alerts around the body, telling the body about threats that are happening. They send signals to tell the body to digest food. They send signals to activate brain cells and to change brain activity. And they also help send signals to tell hormones to be released. And so histamine is a cell signaling molecule. It's like one of those text messages. And we have different types of cell signaling molecules in the body. So we have paracrine signaling. So a paracrine signal is basically when a signal, like that text message, acts on a nearby cell. So one cell is telling another cell to do something. So that would happen during like an allergic reaction where histamine is released from mast cells and then it causes inflammation elsewhere. Then you have autocrine signaling. So autocrine signaling is essentially when something acts on the same cell that released it to regulate its own activity. And then we also have these neurotransmitters, which are so important for brain function. And histamine is actually involved in a lot of neurotransmitter action. It's involved in wakefulness, in appetite, in learning, in mood. It's really important as a molecule. Like, it gets a bad rap because, like anything, it's in excess that the issues arise. But also, low amounts of histamine can be just as much of an issue as high histamine. So think of it, like I said, like the body's text system. It's a chemical messenger involved in immune function, digestion, nervous system function, and it acts on so many different parts of the body. So we have different receptors for histamine. So with any, I was explaining this to some clients earlier. Think of receptor sites like a lock. So you have a lock for a door, and then you have the key for the door, and the key is what opens the lock. Receptor sites are like the lock, and then you have the key, which is the hormone or the histamine that basically goes into the. I kept doing that earlier. I was like, stop doing that. goes into the lock and basically unlocks the door. So we have these different receptors where histamine will dock and that elicits a response. So when that histamine binds to a receptor, it makes the body do something. So for example, it might shout, there's a threat here, and that will trigger inflammation. So that would be if we had a pathogen that enters our body. It might signal make more stomach acid, and that will aid our digestion. It might signal wake up, stay alert, and that regulates our sleep wake cycles in the brain. Or it might signal we need more estrogen, and that will stimulate something that then makes our bodies release more hormones. So you can see we've got H1, H2, H3, and H4 receptors. So H1 receptors are found in the brain, in the uterus, in blood vessels, in skin, and in lungs. And then the effects of too much histamine on those receptors means allergic responses, anxiety, uterine contractions, and blood vessel dilation. H2 receptors are found in the stomach lining and in the heart. And that basically means that when those H2 receptors get hit by the histamine, that will increase stomach acid and it will affect your heart rate. H3 receptors are in the brain and the nervous system. So that means that that affects neurotransmitter release. And then H4 are immune cells, so things like white blood cells, and that's involved in inflammation and immune regulation. So inflammation, again, is one of those words that gets like spoken about all the time at the minute. And so many people book discovery calls with me and they're like, I'm inflamed. And I'm like, how do you know you're inflamed? How do you actually know? You might feel like you're inflamed, but do you actually know you're properly inflamed? But inflammation is a real thing. And again, some of that inflammation could be coming from too much histamine driving inflammation up. So, like I mentioned, the key issue is when there is too much histamine, we need histamine because it creates stomach acid, it helps the immune system, it creates wakefulness, but too much of it is the issue. So, when we have too much, depending on what system it's in, depends on what symptoms will be experienced. So, for example, too much histamine, lung issues, asthma, shortness of breath, sinusitis, wheezing, rhinitis. Too much histamine, how it affects the uterine lining and the uterus, PMS, PMDD symptoms, heavy periods, menstrual pain, because it's affecting how hormones regulate and work. In the muscles, muscle pain, fibromyalgia, bone pain, in the central nervous system and brain, headaches, migraines, vertigo, brain fog, mood dysregulation, anxiety, all things like that. POTS, palpitations. We've got easy bruising, racing heart. Then in the digestive tract, you could have constipation, diarrhea, vomiting, acid reflux. In the bladder, frequent urination, overactive bladder, interstitial cystitis, and then the skin. You know, a lot of people think of the skin when they think of histamine because it's the classic kind of hives situation. But you might not have a single hive and have high histamine levels. I've never had a hive in my life, but I had high histamine when my immune system was overactive and was causing craziness. So things like eczema, hives, flushing, urticaria, they are all things that can happen when you have too much histamine in your body that is being released from mast cells, which are part of the immune system. So I want you to think of it like,
Can I just ask you a question?
of course.
Because I mean, if I'm still learning, I'm like like the different receptors, the H1 to H4. Can
Mhm.
some people have some that are really like not very efficient and some that are the others that are actually fine? Like, for example, someone might look at that and be like, well, I've got one over there and one over there and one over there. But how does that connect to like the H1 to H4 receptors?
Yeah, so it could be that some people are more active in certain receptors, for example. So everyone will experience things differently. Their body experiences things differently. And some of that can be how they're genetically pre-programmed, how the receptor sites work, how cells function. So two people can experience histamine in a very different way, essentially. And I've seen that time and time again with people like, for myself, again, I didn't have the classic skin stuff with my histamine, but I would get like puffy eyes when I woke up, and it would be so random that I'd be like, well, why have I got puffy eyes today? And yesterday I didn't have puffy eyes at all, but what have I done differently? I have no idea. And then certain other things that I would experience, and some things that I didn't even put down to being histamine. And again, for many females going through perimenopause, a lot of perimenopausal symptoms really are the same as high histamine symptoms. And so we put it down to hormones, but is it actually hormones or is it actually the histamine that's the problem? Now, I will share with you how histamine and hormones are connected in a moment because that's a big topic as well. But basically, what we need to think about is your histamine bucket, the size of your histamine bucket. So, what determines basically what is going on with your histamine levels is how full that bucket gets. So, essentially, it's thinking, how much is being produced. So you will produce histamine yourself within your body, but you can also get it from external sources like foods. And also, how much are you breaking down? So if you think, let's say you're ingesting loads of histamine-rich foods, you aren't breaking it down properly, and then you're creating lots because your immune system is overactive for some reason, your bucket is going to fill up very quickly. Now, if you're not draining that bucket, it's going to overflow. And that's when the symptoms start to arise. And the more full it is, the more symptoms we start to see. So, what determines your histamine levels? There are an array of levels to this, but the main things that we need to think about are genetics, because genetics will dictate the size of your histamine bucket. Unfortunately, some people are just born with a smaller histamine bucket. That's just part of life, unfortunately. So genetics can play a role. So we have something called an HNMT enzyme, which is responsible for breaking down histamine in the brain and in tissues. And that enzyme is determined by something called methylation. So methylation is a process that happens in the body and does lots of different things in the body. So think of it a bit like a tag system in the body. Methylation is like this process where tags go and get put around the system, telling the body to do different things, telling the body to break down estrogen and excrete it properly, telling the body to create new cells and DNA and detox properly. That's what methylation essentially is. But it's determined, the rate we methylate is determined by some of our genetics. So genetically, some people are not as good at methylating. I am one of those people. I've got mutations, we call them SNPs, on my MTHFR gene and my COMT gene, and both of those can impair histamine clearance. There's also other genes called HLA genes that can also mean that your histamine bucket is just a lot smaller. So too much histamine is going to accumulate a lot quicker and you don't get rid of it as quickly. So when you've got a reduced ability to methylate, that slows your ability to clear histamine, which is really important to know. So undermethylation and overmethylation are both issues. Too much methylation can cause issues. Too little methylation can cause issues. So when we're undermethylating, we can end up with high histamine because it means we're not using methylation to break it down properly. We can end up with low serotonin, low dopamine, low melatonin, so sleep issues. And we can end up with something called high homocysteine, which drives inflammation within the body. Symptoms someone might experience are things like anxiety, OCD, perfectionism, allergies, food sensitivities, hormonal issues, insomnia, racing thoughts, poor detox ability. So, just an accumulation of toxins that you don't get rid of very well. Fatigue with things like sulfur rich foods. So, if you find that onions, garlic, things like that make you feel horrible, you probably have a bit of a methylation issue and a sulfation issue as well. And then over methylation, you can actually end up with low histamine levels. And like we've discussed, histamine is actually important. You need it. So you can end up with low histamine, high dopamine, high serotonin, and high isn't always better. We always talk about serotonin being the happy hormone and how good it is. You don't want excess serotonin. That's not a good situation at all. And then you can end up with low homocysteine, which again is not good either. Symptoms you might experience: lethargy, depression, low motivation, brain fog, hypersensitivity to sound and light, reactions to methylated B vitamins. So if you've ever taken a B complex and it's got a lot of methyl Bs in it and you feel horrible from it, it could be because of that. And apathy is another thing. So genetics, number one. Number two, toxins and the environment. So toxins and environmental stressors, which we are all exposed to on a daily basis, basically silently fuel histamine overload. So they activate mast cells, because it's like when you've got these foreign bodies within your body, these toxins that our immune system is reacting to, it's going to create this inflammatory response and release histamine, because it's like your body's thinking, well, I'm in danger. These things are not good for me. I need to try and dilute them and get rid of them. So that basically blocks your breakdown pathways. It can damage the gut, and that can even mimic hormones. We've got these things called xenoestrogens that are in many things that we're all using on a daily basis, whether that be skincare, makeup, household cleaning products. They mimic estrogen, and that can impact histamine release as well, because estrogen and histamine have a very close relationship. So what I want you to think about is mast cells, which are what histamine is released from, are like grenades. They're like your histamine grenades. Toxins are like pulling the pin out of the grenade and letting it explode. So our body needs proper liver function to be able to get rid of environmental toxins. And we also need methylation to be able to get rid of environmental toxins, to break down toxins, but also to break down histamine. So, um, environmental chemicals, fragrances, plastics, cleaning agents, they're burdening the liver detox pathways essentially. And that means that's diverting resources away from histamine breakdown into breaking down these toxins instead. Another thing that is an environmental exposure that people don't really know a huge amount is mold exposure. And the problem with mold is that a lot of people have it and they don't know they've got it because it's quite silent a lot of the time. No, I think we often think, right, well, I can't see it anywhere. I haven't got mold in my house. There's no black on the walls, and I can't smell that fusty smell. We're all good. Not necessarily true. Unfortunately, I'd love it to be that way. But if you've ever had a leak in your house, mold starts forming within 24 hours of a leak. So if you've ever had a leak, you want to get it seen to straight away to check that there's not mold in cavity walls. You know, when unfortunately this happens a lot in the UK, you know, leaky showers. How many of us have had leaky showers? Comes through the ceiling, and then there could be mold forming in the floorboards essentially. One of my clients actually sent me some pictures. So she's had a lot of severe immune system dysregulation. And I put about mold on my stories because I had black mold in my system and I had some really weird neurological stuff and again, histamine issues. And I was like, where is this coming from? So I did what's called a mycotoxin test and it showed that I'd got quite a high level of mold in my system. And again, number one was that because I just wasn't detoxing particularly well because I'm not a great methylator. And number two, where in my environment have I picked it up? Is it in my house? Or I've been traveling a lot. I was staying in Airbnbs and I definitely stayed in a moldy Airbnb in Tampa. I could see it. It was not a good sitch. We stayed for 3 days and I was like, I'm tapping out of this. Like, get me out. I'm a celebrity. Get me out of here. But again, that had accumulated in my system. And then that started to cause some issues. So with mold, it's something that you kind of have to not be pedantic about because it can become one of those things that you get a bit like obsessive about, and that's not a situation to live in because the stress of that will actually cause more damage than the mold will. But it's just something to be mindful of. So my client basically sent me some pictures. She was like, okay, could this have anything to do with my issues? And she sent me pictures. She was like, there was no issues in my house. I never smelt it, could never see it. But when they ripped the bathroom out, black mold all under the bath. And then in the kitchen, they ripped the kitchen cupboards out. And again, she was like, there was no smell, nothing, black mold all along the walls where she'd been living, basically. So not ideal. But again, exposure is a big histamine trigger, especially in the nervous system and in the lungs. So for me, that's why I was experiencing quite a lot of neurological stuff. I believe is because mold was messing with my neurotransmitters and my central nervous system. And it's linked to mast cell activation syndrome. So that can, be symptoms of brain fog, anxiety, dizziness, breathlessness, histamine flushing. And again, as females, what do we think that is? Oh, hormones. I'm having a hot flush. Could be histamine instead. Thirdly, hormones. So, like I mentioned earlier, we have endocrine disrupting chemicals that mimic estrogen. The issue with histamine, not only in the fact that your body is now diverted to breaking down toxins rather than histamine, is the fact that estrogen and histamine basically have this kind of weird relationship. Estrogen dominance, when you have too much estrogen in relationship to progesterone, liberates histamine. It makes you release more histamine. Then what happens is it reduces an enzyme called DAO, which is how you break down histamine. So that means you're creating more, liberating more, freeing it up, not breaking it down. And then estrogen, unfortunately, makes histamine go up. So then you're stuck in this big cycle where you've got estrogen creating higher histamine creating the release of more estrogen, and it keeps going round and round and round. And then histamine keeps climbing, estrogen keeps climbing unless you do something about it. Now it's thinking chicken and egg, which came first, the high estrogen or the high histamine that then drove the estrogen up? But either way, they both need managing. So it's really important to do that. So when you have high histamine as a female, you may notice PMDD type symptoms, PMS. They get worse around ovulation, new food sensitivities, again, anxiety, insomnia, skin issues with no real cause behind it, not really knowing why. PMDD, like I mentioned, they are all things that can be linked to high histamine. And then what we need to consider is progesterone's role in all of this, because progesterone is really calming. It's the yin to estrogen's yang. It stabilizes mast cells as well. So that means it calms down the release of histamine. And low progesterone, which is really common in women over 40, means less protection against those histamine storms. Because unfortunately, what normally happens is not histamine, progesterone is normally the first hormone to start declining. Estrogen is doing this big roller coaster. Progesterone is just like, oh. So then we've got that big difference, and then we haven't got the progesterone to calm the system down or to help stabilize those mast cells. Next up, we have gut health, absolutely crucial when it comes to histamine. So it plays a really central role in the release of histamine and the breaking down of histamine. So some gut bacteria can produce histamine. So certain ones that we need to make sure we keep in check so that they don't end up releasing and creating more and more histamine. So if you are really dominant in these certain bacteria, you can then have too much histamine being made right inside your body. So it's not coming from an external source, it's coming from an internal source in your gut. Then, when the gut lining is damaged, it can lead to immune system activation because most of the immune system is located in your gut lining. This is one of the most crucial things you can ever learn is how to have a solid, healthy gut lining. The unfortunate thing is it gets damaged quite easily. Certain foods will damage it, medications will damage it, inflammation in the gut will damage it, stress will damage it massively. And stress doesn't only damage the gut lining, it actually makes the cells become porous. So things can actually go directly through the cells, even if there's no gaps between the cells of your gut lining. So learning to look after your gut lining is absolutely crucial because if you think about it, our gut is the entry point to the outside world. That's why we have mucous membranes. So we have the first line of defense against invaders is our skin, and it's the mucous membranes that we have within our nostrils, down our throat, down our digestive tract. So within our gut lining, we have this big mucous membrane, this mucous layer, which is there where the immune system is housed to keep everything in check. So if you imagine, it's very similar. If you cut yourself, you've got an entry point from the outside world into your body. So when you cut yourself, that's why you get like inflammation in that place because it brings the white blood cells to the injury to basically get rid of bacteria, to kill them off and to start the healing process. So with your gut, that mucous membrane, just like the cut in the arm, if you've got a holy bit, basically, most of your immune system is there, that's going to get stimulated. And that's going to cause this overactivity in the immune system, this aggressiveness. So if you're someone who finds that you end up with, more and more food sensitivities, that's not normal. I'm here to tell you, you shouldn't have a list as long as your arm of food sensitivities, of things that you can't eat without feeling rubbish. That's a surefire sign that you've got a leaky gut. So we need to make sure the gut lining is super healthy to protect the immune system and to keep the immune system calm. A leaky gut also impairs DAO production, and DAO is that enzyme that helps break down histamine. And DAO is made in the intestinal lining. It's made in the gut lining. So if you've got a faulty gut lining, it's not healthy, and you haven't got the right bacteria looking after it, then you're going to be in trouble. So things like inflammation, infections, gluten, alcohol, ibuprofen, all kinds of non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, they can all damage the gut lining, but they can also reduce DAO enzyme output. And that means you can't break down the histamine as effectively. If you're someone that finds, healthy foods make you react, let's say aged cheese is not necessarily the healthiest of foods. It's not bad food. But if you find that there's certain health foods like sauerkraut, kimchi, bone broth, things like that make you really reactive and you're like, avocado, they're good for me. Why do I feel terrible when I eat them? Again, it's because they will produce histamine or release histamine. So you have certain foods that are high in histamine naturally, like aged cheeses, cured meats, leftovers. And then you've got some foods that are histamine liberators, which means they cause the body to release more histamine. So tomatoes, citrus fruits, strawberries, chocolate, coffee, they are all histamine liberators. So it just triggers your body to release more. Then if you've got a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, which many people have, if you've got IBS, I'm going to say 95% of the time you've got small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. That is going to cause more issues and more histamine related symptoms because you're going to be releasing more histamine from gut bacteria. And then that's going to cause more bloating, brain fog, skin reactions, etc. With a poor gut health as well, we then have poor nutrient status. So when the gut lining is not healthy and we've got this small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, we are not absorbing nutrients from our diet properly. And that means we're missing out on vital nutrients that help break down histamine. B vitamins are really important for methylation. Copper, vitamin C, magnesium, they all help break down histamine. But if you're either not getting them through your diet because your diet's not good, or you're not getting them because you're not absorbing, we're in trouble. Stress is the next one, and I'm going to leave that to Lucy because she can explain this wonderfully. And then finally, I'm just going to briefly touch on the immune system. So, if you have chronic activation of your immune system, that will drive histamine up. So, chronic activation of the immune system can happen for multiple reasons. It can happen with mold, it can happen if you are overly stressed, if you have low hormones. And unfortunately for us females, as we age and hormones shift, we are more prone to having immune system activation because one of the things that keeps the immune system in check is hormones. So when they become out of balance, we are much more likely to end up with immune system dysregulation. We are the superior race, ladies, just so you know, if there's any men on here, I'm sorry, but we actually are because we have stronger immune systems than men. So man flu is actually a real thing. You know what men are like when they get ill? You're like, seriously, pull your finger out, like get a grip. Ben is terrible, like literally, but it's a real thing because their immune systems are weaker than ours. So it hits them hard. And for females, we've got a really strong immune system, of course, because we're the ones who carry children. So that's, physiologically makes sense. But what that also means is our immune systems are already here on the cusp. They are kind of, ready to overact. So that means a few little drops in the ocean, and then that immune system becomes overreactive. Now, if you're someone that never gets ill, many people wear that as a badge of honor. They're like, I never get a cold. Everyone in the house has got the cold. I'm good. I didn't get it. It's not necessarily a good sign. You should actually get ill once a year. You should, if you're surrounded by bugs and things, you should get ill once a year. I'm not saying you should get ill all the time, but you should get ill once a year. That shows that your immune system is doing its job. If you've got a really overactive immune system, you're basically just creating a lot of chronic inflammation because the immune system is constantly being triggered and creating inflammation within the body. And that creates long-term disease everywhere, but it never actually is like allowing you to be ill because it's constantly just fighting. And that's not what you want. It's like having a little internal war constantly going off in your body. Of course, that's not going to be helpful. So I'm just going to leave you with a few key things that can help with histamine. So in the beginning, having a lower histamine diet, I would not say that's something you want to be doing long term because that's not fixing the issue. If you're someone with a smaller genetic bucket, yes, maybe you need to be slightly more mindful about certain histamine rich foods and too many of them accumulating. But alongside that, it's really thinking, make sure the systems are working well. But in a short term phase, yes, maybe lowering histamine in your diet can be helpful whilst you're having any kind of flare ups or whilst you're trying to fix the gut. DAO enzymes. So you can take DAO enzymes if you are someone who is genetically more pre-programmed to having low production of DAO because your histamine bucket is smaller. So you can buy them online and they can help you break down histamines. And again, if you are someone who does have that small genetic bucket and you're like, well, I really want a glass of wine, which is high in histamine, take DAO enzymes before you have it and it's going to help. Quercetin. So quercetin is a natural substance from plant and it helps to stabilize mast cells. So that can be a nice one to just settle things down. Nettle is a really nice one as well. So nettle tea can be super helpful. There's an amazing supplement that I recommend to a lot of my clients. It's not the cheapest, but it's called Toxaprevent, and that can be really helpful too because it's like a mop. It will mop up histamine. And again, like I'm saying, these are all things that are not all day, every day. That's not dealing with the root a lot of the time. It's just things that can help whilst you're going through processes. Hormone balance, you've got to balance your hormones, ladies. If you've got this estrogen dominance, a lot of women have it and they don't even know it. But super important to balance your hormones and support your liver detoxification pathways. You need to make sure that phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 liver detox is working. Phase 3 is pooping. If you are not going to the toilet daily, I'm telling you right now, you are not detoxing properly. That is a full-blown 100% fact. Number one is you have to get going to the toilet daily. You have to make sure bile is flowing sufficiently because bile is one of those substances that creates motility, but also is an antimicrobial. And it's kind of like it's like dish soap in your gut, basically. It keeps everything in check. It helps break down fat so you can absorb nutrients properly, and it can help with histamine. So we need bile flow to be nice and sufficient. And that starts in the liver because the liver is where we produce bile, and then the gallbladder is where we store it. So looking after your liver, phase 1 and 2 detoxification, really, really important. And that can be done through certain nutrients, making sure you're getting cruciferous veggies in, making sure that you are, not overloading your liver with toxins, and you are getting the nutrients that your body needs, things like milk thistle, tudka, um, green tea extract, glutathione. They're all things that can support the liver as well. But again, that can be very individual depending on where someone starts. And then finally, addressing root causes. Otherwise, what we're doing is green pharmacy. And I'm very honest with people about that. What I see in this day and age more than ever is people going, right, what supplement can I take for that? What supplement can I take for that? What supplement can I take for that? And I'm a big fan of supplements. I really am. But if we're just trying to supplement our way out of a situation, that is just green pharmacy. It's just doing what a doctor would do, but with a herbal tablet instead. So we have to think, right, we have to go down to the deeper levels, the root causes, look at things like genetics, look at labs, look at gut health, look at hormone balance, and then work a system to get those back in order. So, oh, I've just completely missed that slide, but there we go. That's exactly what I was just talking about. So, if you are watching this and you're thinking, okay, there's some stuff that needs to be done here, I really probably need some support around this, and you need to look deeper into the roots rather than just the symptoms, this is exactly what I do with clients on a one-to-one basis. This is where I spend my time and my life doing all of this side of things with females and some men, some select men, to help them get their bodies back into a state of regulation and really get the systems of the body working in the right order. Because this is the reality. So many people think they've done all the things, and so many of the people that I speak to go, I've tried all the diets, I've tried all the things. And I'm like, you might have tried all the things, but did you do them in the right order? Probably not, because you don't know what you don't know. And unless you spent thousands of hours studying the human body and studying all this stuff, you don't know what you don't know. So that's where someone like I come along to be able to go, well, I'm the person who's done the study for you, so I can guide you and support you and show you how to piece the puzzle together. So this little QR code is one that you can scan if you'd like to book a free discovery call where we can discuss your symptoms, what's going on, and then I can let you know how I work with clients to see if it's going to be something that could be helpful to you. So I am now going to pass over to the legend that is Lucy Superfox. Oh, that's just some testimonials there. So yeah, I will pass over to Lucy and she can then carry on.
Beautiful. Actually, before I start talking into my slides, I thought I would just share a little bit about my histamine journey. So, I have actually had histamine issues since I was tiny, since I was a teeny tot. I have had issues my whole life as a child. I could never eat things like strawberries and tomatoes. Like I had everything that Sarah talked about from a symptomology perspective. I had asthma when I was a child, very severe allergies, and I'm going to talk about some of the more emotional side and around being hypersensitive. I'm going to talk about neurodiversity. I'm going to talk about kind of how all of that connects into this. But that kind of carried on throughout my life. And there were lots of things that would seasonally I wouldn't be able to eat, and then I would be okay again. And it wasn't really until I got really, really sick when I was 25. I had a breast implant rupture. They were unfortunately the PIPs, the French ones that were full of mattress and car grade silicon rather than human grade silicon. And I was already kind of 4 months into basically a form of toxic shock before we actually knew what was wrong with me. So you can imagine that, like what Sarah was talking about in terms of like liver health, gut health, detoxification, immune system, I was, I'm sorry, I'm a swearer. I was basically fucked, right? And for want of a better word, there wasn't really one. And I wish I'd known Sarah at that time, but Sarah wasn't the Sarah she is now, right? So at that time, I went down the route of having the implants removed. I went down the route of, fixing the medical things that needed to be fixed, but I was left in an absolute mess. And so the first place I actually went was functional nutrition. I actually flew to America. I spent some time in the Environmental Health Center in Dallas, basically trying to get myself back on track. And I was funny because I've recently revisited all these test results because I'm actually working with Sarah currently. And I was like, let me find all these test results from all these years and let's just see how things have changed. But where I was at was not only had I been experiencing kind of what I call generic histamine issues my whole life, hormone issues my whole life. Actually, what happened as a result of this rupture was a complete like my whole life fell apart basically. But why that was the best thing that ever happened to me is because one, it led me into functional nutrition, and then it led me into what I do now, which is obviously as a root cause therapist and someone who focuses on trauma. So what's happened to me since is it took me a couple of years to get my gut health back on track. I obviously had full-blown small intestinal bacterial overgrowth from the impact of the rupture. I had very poor detoxification. I had basically zero hormones, no thyroid hormone. They were basically non-existent because my immune system had basically tanked itself because the body was attacking itself because of what was going on. So then what happens is I spent years and years working on my gut health, rebuilding my hormones. And then about 5 years ago, 4 years ago, what year is it? 25. Yeah, 4 years ago, I moved into this house and I was taking my thyroid medication and it started to make me feel weird. And I just thought, I'm just going to not take it for a bit. I'm just going to see what happens. And I stopped taking it and I started to feel better. And I went and had my bloods done and my thyroid was fine and all my hormones were fine and everything was fine. And so what happened in that time was a combination of a lot of things. But what happened in 2021/2022, we kind of went to an end of 21, was that I had been on a massive trauma healing journey. I had gone all the way back into my past to process what had come up for me. So it's not a surprise to me that I then found more regulation with my hormones, with my thyroid, with my body as a whole. My ability to tolerate high histamine foods was improved. Everything was improving until last year when I woke up one day in a mad flush out of nowhere and started to have these crazy hormonal symptoms. Now I am nearly 38 and having had some hormonal issues in my younger years, I thought maybe this is it. Maybe I'm into perimenopause. And, truthfully, there's a lot of symptoms there that kind of made sense. It was always around my cycle. And so Sarah and I had kind of some light conversations about it and we put in some kind of general strategies just to help it and see what happened. And it did make a difference. Fast forward to this year, I then started to experience the odd little thing that just felt a little bit out of whack. Things just didn't feel quite the same in terms of my histamine tolerance. Like I was doing all the things that I've been doing my whole life. So I am somebody who does have the HLA genes. I'm someone who has the methylation genes. So I am someone who lives a relatively low histamine life. I have DAO every day of my life. I use Tox Prevent, like Sarah said, so I'm doing all these things anyway. But it started to get to the point where I was having, someone mentioned acid reflux. I was getting acid reflux, and I'm somebody who eats a really nourishing diet. That's something I've done for a long time. And I was having all these kind of crazy hormonal symptoms. Like I was getting very, what the word I want to use is mardy, but what I really was horrible, horrible before my period. And I was like, this is just not me, at all. 18 days a month, I'm one person, and 12 days a month, I'm someone else. And I was like, I need help. So I went down all the usual routes. I, consulted a menopause doctor and she was like, you're too young. Don't want to talk to you. Literally just laughed me off my private appointment that I paid for. And I was getting really frustrated. And anyway, and Sarah and I had done some Dutch tests last year. Dutch tests are amazing, by the way. I can't read them. No idea what they say, but they're amazing. And I just decided, in fact, actually, if I tell you the real story about why I took a stool test, the real story about why I took a stool test is that loads of my clients all found out they had parasites. And it started to make me think that it was the universe telling me I had one. Slightly maybe this is something I need to look at. Anyway, as far as I'm concerned, looking at the stool test is not an indication that's the case. So anyway, but what did come up was something called H. pylori. So H. pylori is an interesting bacteria, which I'm sure Sarah can tell you more about, but it kind of actually acts more in the stomach lining. So actually that's where you get kind of the sore stomach, the acid reflux. So I was like, well, I've got to do some work on this. So let's go in. Now, I started work with Sarah on the 25th of June. So we're only 6 weeks in at this point. And I just want to share with you that as somebody who does have a very good understanding of functional nutrition, as in by that, I'm not a trained functional nutritionist, as in I've been through these protocols before. I understand a lot about gut health. I can read a blood test, I have a good knowledge. What I came into with Sarah, what we have done in these 6 weeks is nothing I would have given myself. And so I share that with you to Sarah's point about we can have all the knowledge, but it's the application of that knowledge that counts. So within 3.5 weeks of working with Sarah, I didn't have any PMS symptoms or PMDD to the point that my period arrived and I didn't even know. And I was like, oh, pickles, it's day 29. Turns out it's here. Whereas the month before had been day 37 freaking days of agony. 29 days, I was thrilled. I'm 3 kilos down, although that was never the goal. And what was amazing for me was to actually watch my reactivity to things in terms from a histamine perspective come down in the first phase of the plan, which is what's called a flush, right? Which is basically working on liver detoxification. Now, I share this with you because there are so many people out there that will think taking all these supplements, the green pharmacy approach, is a really smart approach. And like I said, I eat a really good diet. I take all the supplements, I do all the things, and it wasn't enough. And it wasn't enough because a strategic approach to how your body does things is so potent and powerful. And that is what I'm seeing. I'm seeing that same trend happen with the words regulate your nervous system. I'm seeing it become something banded around Instagram, like something you're supposed to do on a Saturday afternoon when you've got 10 minutes, rather than something that is a strategic approach to how you're shifting and changing in this next season of your life. And so we didn't become respectively what we are in our industries through doing 10 minutes on a Saturday, through picking up a new supplement. Like we've walked through this journey. We've like walked through the frustrations. We've walked through the pain and the suffering. And I will tell you, I will probably have, Sarah might disagree, but I will probably have histamine issues for the rest of my life. Like I probably will. I'm kind of okay with it because I've lived with it up to this point. But when it interferes with the quality of my life, I sat down and said to myself, my business is great, my relationship with money's great, my husband's great, everything's great. But you know what I want to be? I want to be great. I want to feel great 30 days out of 30 days of my cycle. Granted, I'm a woman, I'm going to have to surrender to that. And that is why I chose to invest in myself working with Sarah. I could have done some of this myself. I chose not to. And I say that to you because we often do these workshops and we give you so much free advice, and I'm all for it. Like we love what we do. But I just want you to come off this not feeling bamboozled by the information, but being led in the next direction of wherever you choose to go next. Go all in on whatever that direction is. Don't kind of layer yourself up with too much information about all these things, because that's what Instagram does, right? It's what the algorithm's designed to do is, just keep feeding you the same stuff said by a different person in a different way. And choose a way, because when I chose a way with my trauma healing journey, I came off thyroid meds and I've been off them ever since. When I chose away with my trauma healing journey, I changed my relationship with money. When I chose, do you see what I mean? So when you choose something and you stick with it and you follow through, you'll find your way at the end of that way. So anyway, that was a slight side note, but I felt also one, just to reference, I'm only 6 weeks in with Sarah and I feel absolutely incredible. I mean, just look at my skin. Just look at it. Not that it was particularly bad before, but So let's talk about how histamine connects to your nervous system. So I am actually confident that a lot of you have heard the words regulate your nervous system, or Sarah's talked tonight a little bit about the nervous system. So I'm going to give you like a whistle stop on this. So your nervous system, in other words, is kind of like your alarm system. It's basically designed to keep you safe, keep you alive, and protect you. That's what it's actually designed to do. So there are actually lots of parts of your nervous system. I did not bring that image. There's like lots of different branches and chains. But when we think about what's called the autonomic nervous system, so you could also say the automatic nervous system if you wanted a different word, it's the stuff that happens without you thinking, right? And there are two branches of that officially, which is your parasympathetic and your sympathetic. So you'll have all felt the sympathetic nervous system. If someone makes you jump, taps you on the shoulder, or cuts you up in traffic, you're going to feel that heightened state of what's called your sympathetic nervous system. Now, what happens when you're in that sympathetic state is that the body is designed and primed for you to be in the position to either fight or flight, right? So the energy of kind of run away or defend yourself. So your body then goes into this energy of kind of preserving energy. So it will release, for example, it will release glucose from your liver to be used as fuel for you to then be able to run with that glucose. But what it will also do is then stop digestion. Because in that moment, we don't have time to be digesting food. We're way too busy, right? It will, then what will happen is you'll see contraction in some areas, and that's absolutely fine for the period of time that you're in your sympathetic nervous system. That is what your body is designed to do. Needing a wee would be awfully inconvenient if you needed to run away from a saber-toothed tiger, right? It'd be awfully inconvenient, wouldn't it? So your body is designed to keep you safe. What happens is life has become chronically stressful. And people are in a chronic state of sympathetic where they could be sat in a Zoom meeting at home, perfectly comfortable, half with the pajamas on. I've got joggers on the bottom, I'm going to be honest. I wore white jeans all day and they were super tight. So, could be in their super comfies, everything could be right with the environment, and they're having an argument with their boss on Zoom, right? They're in fight or flight, but it doesn't mean they're running away or they're about to punch someone, although we've all been there. So what happens when we're in this chronic sympathetic state is the nervous system can become dysregulated, because what is supposed to happen is we are supposed to, once the threat is over, go into what's called our parasympathetic nervous system. And our parasympathetic nervous system is when our heartbeat slows, we're digesting food, we're making hormones, like we're breathing well, our heartbeat slows down, like it's an amazing space. This is the kind of energy that a lot of you will feel when you feel really relaxed or you feel really chilled. So what happens is we're living in chronic stress and the nervous system goes, I cannot freaking stay here. I cannot stay in this stressful state. Like it's not designed to do that. And so we then develop strategies that we try to use to move us out of sympathetic into parasympathetic. But let me tell you what's actually happening with those strategies. So those strategies might be watching television, having a glass of wine, having a biscuit or something sugary or sweet to eat, scrolling Instagram, right? All of those things are designed, you're trying to help yourself relax. You're doing a good thing by intention, but what they're actually doing is not moving you into the part of parasympathetic where rest happens. They're moving into the energy of freeze, which brings me to my beautiful image on the right-hand side. So there is a guy called Dr. Stephen Porges who created this concept of what's called polyvagal theory. And that is that we don't move just from sympathetic into parasympathetic, but the parasympathetic has two parts. And that is that the parasympathetic has the green bit at the bottom, which is the bit we'd all love to think of. So that's when we're joy, we're in the present moment, we're grounded, we're really kind, we're mindful, right? That's the energy you think of maybe when you think of meditation, right? Or when you've had a beautiful lie-in. But what happens most of the time through life is that through chronic stress, we either end up numbing ourselves and shutting ourselves down through an outside strategy, or we become so overburdened with stress that we end up in the freeze response, which is called dorsal vagal. And this is where we feel a lot of those energies like apathy, like shutdown, like what's the point? And this can become a chronic cycle where we get activated, and this happens a lot with business owners, a lot with entrepreneurs that I work with, or women in corporate, is their life and their business is maybe so super stressful, it's keeping them in the sympathetic. They've then got some kind of strategy that moves them back down, so because they can't stay up here. But what it's actually doing is moving them into freeze. And so they're never actually moving back into that kind of green state, that kind of what's called that ventral vagal, where the body then actually rests and repairs. Now, why this is tricky when we're talking about histamine particularly, and when I talk about histamine, I want you to think about all the branches that come off what Sarah said today. So histamine being everything, hormones, being kind of your gut health, being your liver health, and everything that comes from that, is that when the nervous system is overactivated, what happens is mast cells that Sarah talked about become overactivated. So mast cells are not just reacting to allergens. That's not just their only job, right? They react to energy. They react to the environment. They are emotionally reactive chemical messengers. And so that could be everything from a hormonal fluctuation to a temperature fluctuation to a stress fluctuation. And so even if you've got all the strategies in place to manage, maybe like me, the genetic issues that come with histamine, if you're not managing what's happening in your nervous system, your mast cells are on high alert. They're busy pulling pins off grenades, right? Because they are genuinely in a place where they think that you're under threat. And this is why doing the work to heal trauma, to be able to process how you really feel, to actually move through these states of this chronic stress is so important if you want those feelings of long-term regulation, if you want those long-term feelings of not being constantly in this symptomology of things like histamine and hormones. Sarah, would you please click the next slide? Thank you so much. Wonderful. So, with chronic stress comes chronic issues. I was very inspired by Sarah's infographics and little graphics. So I spent some time on Canva and used all Sarah's colors. It was quite fun. So chronic stress brings chronic issues. And so the first thing that I wanted to talk about, and this is going to be the word of 2026. The words of 2026 are going to be cellular energy. The words that are used in 2026 are going to be cellular energy, and we're going to talk about it from two components. One, the stuff that Sarah talks about in functional nutrition, and two, from vibration and frequency, and how that shows up in your manifestation game. So when we're under chronic stress, what happens is that chronic stress, and whether that chronic stress is conscious, like you're aware of it, like your job is stressful, or unconscious because there's unprocessed trauma, there's things we haven't dealt with, there's situations and environments that we know that are kind of causing things, but we're not dealing with them, or there's any kind of symptomology of like anxiety, depression, any of those things are an indication that there is something kind of going on in the unconscious. The stress, what happens, and Sarah is the one at the big words, but this is the thing that I really grasp about mast cells that really affects trauma, is there's a hormone, I'm probably going to say it wrong, Sarah, the corticotropin releasing hormone has, she's like, I said it right, okay. And the problem with that hormone is when we are under chronic stress is what that says to mast cells everywhere in your gut, in your skin, in your brain is panic. Panic. So that is actually what's supposed to happen. So your body is doing everything it's supposed to be doing. It's not doing anything wrong. It's actually not broken. It's actually doing what it's supposed to be doing when it feels under threat. So what's going to be really important for you is recognizing, where am I putting my body, energetically speaking, under threat? Where are there issues and triggers that I have that I'm not dealing with? Where are there systems or things happening in my life that are showing up for me regularly that I'm actually not emotionally dealing with or that are causing me to be in this energy of fight or flight? So that's the first thing, is recognizing that that's a chemical process that's happening whether you like it or not, and the state of your nervous system is impacting that. The second thing is mitochondrial function. Now, I am quite woo woo, so we're going to go there, all right? And I am a big believer in the difference of being a root cause therapist. One of the things I do is I work massively with people at the level of energy stored in the body, and that energy being stored in the body as sometimes with memory, sometimes without. But that energy stored in the body can be the cause of a breakdown in energetic flow through the body, right? So the flow through the body, but also can be the reason for dysregulation. And I've, worked with done hundreds and hundreds of sessions at this point. And so I know this to be true. And the number one thing that I am seeing, particularly with clients who have similar issues, some of the things Sarah shared, is that they are showing up with suppressed emotions of things like anger, rage, sadness, and that can sometimes be showing up as hypervigilance, that kind of need to control, that can kind of control freak energy. And the problem with those three energies is they have a really big impact on your what's called your mitochondria, which are the powerhouse of your cells. So the powerhouse of your cells, that's what basically uses all the nutrients, or it uses energy and basically takes that energy and gives that energy to you to do things, right? That's what mitochondria do. But if they are constantly and chronically being damaged because there is a shift in energy that's not quite right in the body, what happens is those mitochondria cannot do the things they're supposed to do. And this is why it's not a coincidence that somebody who is emotionally depressed has extreme fatigue, right? Because the body, the signaling in the body between the energy cells, right? So the mitochondria, which is the little powerhouse of the cell, and the emotions stored in the body, they are affecting each other and talking to each other. So that is why when people do their work to get emotionally well, they often see an improvement in physical wellness, and vice versa. When they do an improvement in physical wellness, they see an improvement in emotional wellness. So the other thing that happens with cell energy, and when cell energy is not working right, because maybe we are an empath, right? Maybe you're a highly sensitive person and you've always been an empath. So maybe you have weak energetic boundaries. We can often take on a lot of energy from other people. And what that can often lead to when we've got this corticotropin hormone signaling the mast cells all the time, when the magic mitochondria are not being very magic, is that can lead to a massive lack of mental clarity. Now, that lack of mental clarity is then going to lead to you making probably some more poor emotional decisions, relying and leaning on things that you've relied and leaned on before, right? Like that glass of wine to relax, or, actually binge watching something on TV rather than spending that time on your business, if that applies. And that happens because of something called emotional feedback loops, which is we think a certain thing that makes us feel a certain way, that makes us take a certain action. That certain action then has a response, which is a resulting thing that happens. So let's say you think that, oh my God, today's been so stressful. And what that makes you feel is like this overwhelm, this sense of overwhelm in your system. And then you've taught yourself that making a glass of wine allows you to feel numb. That numbness in the body, what then happens is you remember it, because the more times we repeat something, the more we remember it. Then what happens the next day is we've reduced all of that wonderful energy that we potentially had that day because we've had some alcohol. And we didn't really even talk about alcohol today particularly, but there's a lot that could be said there. What then happens is the next day we then have the same situation and we go through the same process all over again. And this doesn't just happen with things like, if you're not a wine drinker, this is not just what I'm talking about. Emotional feedback loops are how you've built your business, what your marriage is founded on, how your relationship with food is. It's all a feedback loop. It's what you've programmed, it's what you've conditioned. And that's amazing. Like, I don't want to learn how to tie my shoes every day. I learn how to drive a car, right? Like, programming's really useful, but not when it's programming us to stay in old energies and old emotions that are affecting the health of our nervous system. So those suppressed emotions that often show up in chronic stress are the suppression of energies, anger, rage, shame, and self-abandonment. And so they kind of show up in two groups. So anger and rage on one side, which kind of shows up in a very overactive kind of energy. So the mast cells being very overactive. And when I see somebody who's got a lot of fatigue, chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, we're often looking at kind of shame and self-abandonment. So kind of what some people might call from a judgmental space, like a victim energy. And the reason why they are so separate is they create completely different nervous system responses. So anger and rage, when it is suppressed, will have you teetering on fight or flight the whole time. I don't know if you've ever said, oh, I'm bloody at 99, all it'll take is 1% to knock me over, right? I've said that a lot. And that's about suppressed anger and rage. There's so much going on in the nervous system, we're just not letting it come through. And when you see somebody who's got that real apathy, they hide themselves away, they pull themselves back, they maybe have a lot of fatigue-based symptoms, or like I said, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, we often see that kind of shame and self-abandonment energy come through. And this then leads to behaviors like that people say are self-sabotage. And actually, what it is are these emotional feedback loops that are happening, sometimes causing symptoms like the oh my goodness, I'm not going to say this anymore, the mast cells to be overstimulated, causing these causing symptoms that are then creating a response in the body that then make us feel like shit, right? Because histamine is a chemical, it has a chemical response in the body and the brain. And then we go and do the behavior all over again, right? So suppressed emotions are going to be stimulating your nervous system and in turn stimulating your mast cells. Now, I really wanted to talk about neurodiversity, and I also want to talk about hypersensitivity. So I was hypersensitive to everything. Obviously, when you've had toxic shock, your body is hypersensitive to every chemical going. And like it would, I'm still at the point now where if my husband, he still uses non-chemical deodorant. We've tried, it's not a thing for him. And you know, if I smell too much of that, I can feel that on my lungs. Or like if I walk into a house and somebody used bleach, I know within a second that there's bleach been used in that house because chemically I still have an element of sensitivity. Now there was a point where that was hypersensitivity, and that isn't like, so if you're having this with food, you're having this with chemicals, you're having this with energies and emotions, it's a sign your nervous system is teetering on the edge. It's a sign that your nervous system is in a very strong, constant state of fight or flight because it's trying to protect itself. So that was what I want to say on hypersensitivity. What I wanted to share on neurodiversity, because this doesn't really get talked about enough, but neurodiversity often brings with it an extensive amount of hypersensitivity. So neurodiversity, as the way I look at it, is very much the way Gabor Mate looks at it, which is that it is a developmental impairment that happens as a result of generational or childhood trauma. They have proven that it does not have anything to do with dopamine solely. It has an impact on dopamine and the way dopamine is used in the brain. But ADHD is not a lack of dopamine. That is not what ADHD is. ADHD is a developmental response in the brain when the small human, whether it's in the womb, from generational trauma is real. Just take my word for it. We'll be here till 10 o'clock tonight. Sarah knows. She's done it with me. She's done a generational trauma session, so she knows. Is that basically what creates is the brain creates something called an adaptation. So we are humans, right? So we are our whole lives through evolution, we have been adapting to our environment, adapting to the change in circumstances. And that still happens. Now, sure, would I loved for us to adapt it to lots of things that were better? Absolutely. But what the brain has adapted to do with ADHD is when it doesn't feel safe, it tunes out. So when the brain does not feel like it feels safe in the nervous system, right? Because a safe nervous system feels like a calm mind. When it doesn't feel like that, and we don't have a conscious mind or a subconscious mind to go, oh, I'm unsafe. Oh, it's actually because I just had a car accident. So it's actually normal to feel like this, right? When a baby is experiencing tension or young children are experiencing, things going on in the house. And I always first want to say I had a good childhood. I have a fuck ton of trauma. I had a great childhood, right? So it's not about your parents or your parenting. It's always about how the child interprets the situation. So the child's interpretation of an environment that's unsafe will lead to an energetic, emotional, and physical adaptation in the brain in how it functions. Now, what comes with that is a hypervigilant state. What often comes with a brain that feels unsafe, on top of things symptomology like that's seen in ADHD. I have ADHD, by the way. I can't believe you haven't realized this by now. But I have ADHD, right? So this is coming from genuine personal experience. Is what happens is this hypersensitivity. And so this is why there is a big crossover between empaths, hypersensitivity, being a highly sensitive person, and neurodiversity. And really, you could see it on one big scale if you wanted to. And so why that's really important is that people who have modified themselves or adapted themselves in order to feel safe, who have also then got this layer of hypervigilance and hypersensitivity, will one, take on energies way easier and way faster than other people, and two, will be more chronically and easily stimulated in the nervous system. So actually, sometimes one of the biggest things that could probably help you when you have got an overactive immune system, so maybe you're never sick, or you've got some mast cell issues, would be to look at, where am I taking on too much? Where am I taking on too much energy? Where am I bearing the energetic load from all these other people that's causing me to be in this chronic state of stress? Oh, would you mind flicking for me, Sarah? I forgot I'm not presenting. I was trying to press a button like this. Beautiful. So what's the solution then? So what's the solution? So we've got, maybe you're aware there's unprocessed trauma. Maybe you're in a chronic situation you can't avoid right now. Maybe you're in a situation where there are things that have happened in your past that you actually feel like you've mentally processed, but maybe you haven't emotionally moved through them and grown up. And I don't think we have time for the dolls, but we'll see where we go at the end of the slide. Sarah's like, oh God, the dolls. I'm not gonna have to go there, babes. I'm sorry. I just like my I'm sorry. It's gotta happen. It's gotta happen. I'm sorry. Can you see me? He's watching. Can you see me? Yeah, okay. Right. So these are my dolls. So my clients meet these dolls normally in session 1 or 2. So the way I like to describe how trauma lives within the nervous system is one of two things. So one, you can imagine yourself like a big kind of glowing light, and you can imagine like dark shadows, and those dark shadows have an impact on everything physiologically or emotionally. And that might be a vibe for you, but for most people it's not, because most women who are highly intelligent are up in their heads, right? They've used how they think, they've used the words how and why to manage their entire lives, to keep them safe their entire lives. If they know why something happens or how something happens, then they'll be in control, and that control makes them feel safe, right? But what's happening in that environment is a woman who is not in her body, who is not in a regulated nervous system, a woman who is using her intellect and her hypervigilance to keep her safe. So this is why women tend to respond better to this example, because I'm going to ask you to use your brain rather than your body. So this is grown up you, right? So she doesn't have to be this big, by the way, like, be whatever shape or size you want, but this is grown up you. And grown up you didn't just get here by accident, no matter how old you are. She got here through different experiences, different learnings, different emotions, different life events that happened. So those different life events have led to different versions of her. And those different versions of her have different needs. They have different experiences. They went through different things. So we've got this one, and maybe she had, maybe she went through a divorce. Maybe she went through childbirth. Maybe she went through raising a family. Maybe she went through bankruptcy. So some real adult shit, right? Then we've got this version of us, and maybe this was, 20s, and maybe this is where there was a lot of difficulty around money, or there was a lot of stress, or, changing friendship groups, or actually maybe some significant life events happened for the first time. Maybe a heartbreak here in our kind of late teens that really made us question ourselves and actually has caused some self-doubt. And maybe there was this version of us who, was taking school exams and feeling the pressure as a high achiever, and she just constantly has to prove and constantly has to need something. And then this tiny, teeny version of us who has just always felt unsafe because actually maybe mum and dad were worried about money when we grew up. So what then happens is we go through life and all of these versions of us are still active. So until we do active trauma healing and active nervous system work to clear these versions of ourselves from our past, we think what's happening is we're moving about life as this person, right? But actually what's happening is we're moving about life with all these different versions of us as active. This is why sometimes you say the words, a part of me wants this, or a part of me knows this, or I do this and then this happens and I self-sabotage. And that's because there are different versions of you who've been through different things, who need different things, who actually, all they actually need is to feel safe. And so where something like root cause therapy and lots of other modalities work is they basically create safety in the previous versions of yourself, right? And that's so relevant because most of you are sat here right now, intellectually knowing that you're safe, intellectually probably in a financial position that you're okay, intellectually knowing that you have a job or a partner or something that, what I'd call first world wealth. Like we have more than most people in the world have. You know that, but it doesn't change how you feel. And so this is where doing the inner stuff is foundational if you have these chronic stress type health issues. So this brings me to what is the solution? So just like with Sarah, on the nutritional side, detox is the first step. Oh, sorry, babe, can you go back one? I just didn't talk through it. I'm sorry, I'll be really quick. Just like the first step is detox. So doing the work to detox where this energy, where this trauma, where these emotions, where this programming that is outdated, that is not relevant, this is not showing up in your environment today, but is living as if it's true. And that happens through various trauma healing, but it happens through emotional processing, not through mental processing, not through just understanding how or why something works, but actually processing it. And another word for that is somatic experience. So the soma means the body. So experiencing how that we felt in that experience and moving through it. The second step then, so we've got that detox phase. The second phase is stabilization or optimization. And this is then introducing the practices to regulate the nervous system. And what I see so much is people jumping ahead to doing things like daily breath work and a daily meditation and a morning gratitude list and like this, the morning routine and all this bullshit. And actually they haven't healed and cleared some long-standing emotional triggers and trauma. And what's happening is that then they're emotionally bypassing and wondering why it's not getting better. So nervous system regulation work can only come in once the nervous system has cleared like the waste product, like you would be doing, like I did with Sarah. After 3 weeks, I actually started to feel amazing because my liver was working at a rapid rate. It was then that we could take different approaches with food and try some other things, right? It's the same thing here. That's when rewiring consciously comes in. So there is a massive time and period, like I write programs for this exact reason, so that people can then be rewiring themselves consciously about that area of life, whether it was money trauma or relationship trauma, body-based trauma, sexual trauma, it doesn't matter what it is, but then rewiring that consciously. And this is when you can move into that phase of intentionally developing yourself and growing yourself. And then the final stage, when once you kind of feel like you're in that process and you're moving forward, and my clients will know this, is the third stage is boundaries and protection. Because the truth is, most of you are here because you do have some kind of hypersensitivity. You are in the energy of taking, you're an empath, you're kind of in that energy of serving and guiding and leading others, or you wouldn't be here, because Sarah and I are both these people. So we would not have attracted you. It is physically impossible. We don't live in that kind of universe. And what comes up in this space is the words alignment. So what alignment means is when your body and your mind are on the same freaking page. It means when you decide you want to set a goal for yourself, whether it's a body goal, business goal, money goal, that actually your body feels like, yeah, that feels good. That feels normal. That feels like there should be no activation, by the way, when you set goals. You shouldn't feel excited. You shouldn't jump up and down. It shouldn't be like, wah! It should just be like, yeah, that's going to happen. That is alignment, right? Energetics. This is when you can get really, really smart. Once you've built that foundation of nervous system regulation because you've healed that trauma, this is when you can have some real fun with manifestation. And this is where, energetically speaking, this is when you can be really working at the level of the cells and actually be doing, you've seen, I'm sure, the experiments with water where they talk to water and they give kind words and you see the water crystals change depending on how they talk to them. You could do that now, but the truth is, while there's unprocessed trauma and on Sarah, in Sarah's case, physical chemicals and things that need to be cleared from the body, it's not going to have that much of an effect. But once you move through this kind of process, that's when that magic really starts to show up. And at this point, this is where that beautiful word authenticity comes up. If you are still in a triggered state, whether that's chemically, emotionally, spiritually, or from a trauma-based place, you're not your authentic self. You're not your most grown-up, developed version of you. And you're going to see that show up in your relationship with food and whether you can stick to a plan. You're going to see that show up in your relationship with your business or your career or your partner. And so this is where this foundation of healing and clearing trauma and then bringing in this nervous system regulation then leads to this beautiful optimization. But this can only happen. This is all wonderful. But if I'm doing all of this whilst I'm still not nourishing my body, not helping my organs work properly, I'm not drinking enough water, I'm not getting enough sleep, I'm not doing all these things, then these things are, again, I'm kind of doing half the puzzle. And this is why Sarah and I work together so much with clients, because it's never normally one or the other, and it's normally both. Oh, it's not me. I can't flick the slide. I keep pressing the button. So this is where the magic of root cause therapy is. So root cause therapy is a very special type of therapy that is focused on seeing what's underneath. So this is a great image of the iceberg. So most of us are aware of the conscious mind. We live from here. We rely on this. We rely on willpower, planning, analyzing things, setting goals. And sometimes, if we are fortunate enough to have a spiritual connection, we have that connection to higher self. In my experience, most people who are caught in the conscious mind have not got that deep connection with their higher self, because that comes when we have the full connection with both our subconscious mind and what's happening right at the bottom of that iceberg, which is the unconscious. So the subconscious is where we have the beliefs, it's where we have the fears, and that's some of the stuff we rewrite and clear inside root cause therapy. But more than anything is we get into the unconscious and release the energies that are driving those fears and belief. And so what this allows us to do is process those emotions, process those experiences so that we can emotionally grow up, for want of a better word. And that allows us to move through both the body and the mind. So root cause therapy is super special. I'll let Sarah flip to the next slide. If you want to book a free discovery call, it's not right for everybody, but if you're curious about it, I've got thousands of testimonials, then please feel free to book a free discovery call with me. And my email is lucy@lucysuperfox.com. But look, there's so much I could have said about how that all connects to histamine. I've experienced symptoms of anxiety, I've had heart palpitations, I've had all of it. But what I know is I've come into this plan with Sarah and we're able to dial up or down what we're doing in this plan because I'm coming into it with the foundation of a regulated nervous system. The results that I have had, I know, are not typical in 6 weeks. The weight loss, the energy shift, they're not typical for an average person, because I'm not an average person, because I've done more than average work, right? I've spent years building this strong foundation of a regulated, healthy nervous system, which is meaning that the work I'm doing with Sarah is creating the most incredible results for me. And mainly because I wanted to be in her club of being an optimized female. So, yeah,
We're both in each other's clubs.
that's also true.
Time,
That's
big
also
time. That was mind blowing. Thank you so much, Lucy. And I'm sure everyone is literally like, couldn't take enough notes on everything that you've.
Sorry, I talk so fast. It's the ADHD in it.
I do as well. Literally, I'm sometimes like, and I've got a friend that's German, and she's like, "You need to just slow down." I'm like, okay, I feel like I'm sorry. So thank you so much, everyone. We hope you found that super interesting. It's given you insights into all levels of histamine because like Lucy said, we think of it from a physical perspective, but we have to think of it from a mental, emotional perspective as well, and how all of this basically intertwines. It's all part of being a fabulous human. The human experience is all of this combined, how our mind, our body, our experiences lead us to where we are. And the great thing is knowing that there is so much that you can do when you have the right support and the right strategies from both a mental and a physical perspective to be able to shift you to where you want to be in your health and your happiness. So, thank you so much. If anyone has anything that they want to get in touch with us about, you have our details, and we'll be sending this recording out as well to everyone who's registered. And so, yeah, thank you so much, everybody.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.